In this lesson, we are going to be learning about the while loop. So the while loop is used to perform a particular task over and over again until a condition is true. So a great example of that will be something like this. In here, we have a robot which is running on a treadmill. In this case, we can use the while loop and check while the treadmill is on robot.run, meaning if the treadmill is on, then the robot has to run. But if the treadmill stops, then the robot will stop also. Meaning if the treadmill stops, then the loop will stop because the condition will be false. So in a for loop, we would use the for loop in two cases. The first one would be to iterate over each item of some type of list, and then we can do something with each of those items of the list. The second way that we use the for loop is using the range function, in which we specified a range of values and our for loop will run for that amount of time, and we could perform some action like printing each of those numbers. But in the while loop, what we do is instead we have the while keyword and then our condition. And if that condition is true, let's say in this case the condition is called something is true. So if this variable is true, then our loop will run and do some task repeatedly. But if the condition turns out to be false, then the loop will not run. So it's basically a mixture of the if statement and the for loop. Coming back to Reeborg's world, what I want you to do is go to this drop down, click on it, and then select the second hurdle like this. And if for some reason that did not work or you didn't get the options, then the link is provided in the resources of this video. So this is the second hurdle. You can click on the world info to get some information. So it says that Reeborg has again entered a hurdle race, but this time he doesn't know in advance how long the race is going to be. So the hurdle could be 6 jumps or it could just be a singular jump. So we don't really know when the hurdle is going to stop. So we have to check when Reeborg has reached the flag and then stop Reeborg. So what we need to know to perform this challenge is we need to know the move function and the turn left function, which we have already learned about. But a new condition is the add goal function, which what this does is you could probably tell by the name, it just checks if Reeborg is at the goal or not, and its negations. Now we will see what negation means later on, and we also need to know how to use a while loop. So let's walk through this together. First of all, our jump method will be the same since we are jumping each hurdle one by one, so that is not going to change. But in here we are not going to have a set amount of 6 times because we don't know if the race is going to be 6 hurdles long or 2. So let's run. As you can see, in this case the race was only this long. But if I let's say run it again, in this case the race was only 2 hurdles long. So each time it is going to differ. So let's remove that, and instead of the for loop we are actually going to be using the while loop, and inside the while loop we are going to check the add goal function. So what this add goal function does is it checks if our character, meaning Reeborg, is at the final goal or not. If it is at the final goal, then obviously it is going to return true, but if it's not, then it will return false. And we know that for our while loop to run, this condition has to be true. So instead of having add goal, we are going to check if our add goal is not equals to true, meaning if the add goal is false, then we are going to run this. So if the add goal turns out to be false, meaning Reeborg has not yet reached the final goal, so what is going to do is if the add goal is false, meaning Reeborg has not reached the final goal, then this will be switched with false. And we know that false is not equals to true, meaning this over our condition will be true. So our loop will run. And then what we have to do is we just have to jump. So what will happen is Reeborg is going to be jumping until he reaches the final goal. So if he is at the goal, meaning this will turn out to be true, then we would have this condition true is not equals to true, which is false, meaning it will exit out of the while loop and then Reeborg will stop. But if Reeborg is not at the final goal, then it will keep jumping. Now a cleaner way of doing this is to just remove this and use the not operator, which what this will do is if the goal is false, it will set it to true. If it's true, then it will set it to false. So it is going to basically reverse that, and we have learned about the not operator in the previous tutorials. And this syntax is more preferred because it sounds like English. So while not at goal, jump. So let's step into this. As you can see, in this case we have a 3 hurdle race and it is going inside the while loop. So it is going to check while not at goal. In here it was true, so we are not at the goal yet. So it goes inside the while loop and it performs the jump. So it goes inside the jump function and performs each of these steps like so. And as you can see, it has completed a single jump. Now it is going to just repeat each of these processes and perform the second jump and finally the third jump. And as you can see, Reeborg has reached the final position, and in this case it did not go inside the while loop because this condition was false. Reeborg was actually at the goal, so this would turn out to be false, meaning it will just skip this while loop and our program would end. So the syntax of the while loop will look something like this. We would have the while loop and then our condition, and after that if that condition is true, then it will do a couple of tasks like do this, then do this and do this. So these could be tasks like printing out some numbers or adding digits, etc., so on and so forth. Now when we are working with while loops, you have to look out for something called an infinite loop. Now an infinite loop is a loop which runs for an infinite amount of time. So this can happen with the while loop very easily. Like for example, let's say we have a while loop which checks if 5 is greater than 3, then perform these tasks like so. Now this is going to be turning out to be an infinite loop. Why? Because 5 is always going to be greater than 3 no matter what. So this while loop will keep running until the end of time, meaning your program will be repeating these 3 lines of code over and over again until you close off the program. So we don't want this to happen unless, let's say we are creating a game and we want the game to run until the user closes off the game. So now the question arises, which one should we use? Should we use the for loop or the while loop? That matters on the type of problem which we want to solve. We are going to be using the for loop for cases when we want to perform an operation with each items in a list, for example. So let's say we have a list of fruits like so. And the list contains some fruits like apple, pear and mango. And what we want to do is we want to print out each of the fruits inside this fruits list. So in this case, the for loop will come in handy better than the while loop, because using the for loop we can perform this task in 2 lines. But using the while loop, it is going to be quite hard since we would have to access each of the indices inside the list and then print them out, and that will not be very dynamic. Let's say if the list continues to grow to 10 more fruits, then we would have to print out each of those 10 fruits using the while loop by accessing their indices. But in the for loop, all we can do is we can iterate over our list called the fruits and store each of the fruit inside the fruit variable, and in here we can just print that out and it will work completely fine within 2 lines. But a while loop has its own advantages. Like for example, I told you that it can be used in games which you want to run till the user closes off the console. Now if you ever create an infinite loop, then don't worry about it. All you can just do, you can just close off the program. So let's say you create an infinite loop like 5 is greater than 3 like we saw. In this case, the best way to debug why you're having an infinite loop is sometimes to just print out your condition. So 5 is greater than 3, and if I comment these lines out or just remove them, now if I run the code, as you can see, so what happens is, as you can see right over here, it is printing out the condition each time, and each time it's printing it out, we are getting true. And if we check, Reeborg has already gone off the goal, but still the condition is coming out to be true. So this can help debug your infinite loops very easily. I'll see you in the next lesson.